If there's one console that I've always wanted, it's a PC Engine. And so when fellow YouTube channel Ginger Hippy Gaming got in touch to say he was clearing out a storage unit, found a couple of PC Engines and would I fancy a challenge? Well, I sent him a few pound and he sent me a challenge. So believe it or not, this PC Engine did indeed come from the storage unit of a former shop. A former shop which was abandoned 30 years ago and the roof of the storage unit might have collapsed, but those are just minor details. It does look to be in fairly rough condition, but I'm not overly worried about the dirt and cobwebs and all that. What I would be more concerned about though is the rust. The joypad connector on the front, that is quite a bit of rust that has worked its way out of there. So I'm just worried about how much of it has worked its way into the board, how much damage has that caused. In fact, it's not only prevalent there. If we turn around to the RF port, well, it looks kind of rusty as well. One bonus, I suppose, is that we do have the extension bus cover. Although within here, it is pretty obvious that that's where the spiders set up shop. At least the DC barrel input on this side doesn't look too bad. But to add to the list of problems, the power switch, well, that is seized solid. So I'm sure, like most of you watching this, I am dying to know what this thing looks like inside. I've never been inside one of these before. I've never even touched one of these before. But it just looks like it's 4 game bit screws holding it together. Ginger Hippy Gaming, he has pulled quite a bit out of this storage unit that he's been clearing. In fact, I'll throw some pictures of said storage unit on the screen just now. And so hopefully you can appreciate just what a horrible state the place was in. He has been covering some of this over on his own channel. So if you want to see more stuff that was recovered from the unit, make sure you go and check that out. One thing in particular that I thought was pretty cool was an NES demo unit with the Rob robot display. And in fact, you may have already seen another machine that was picked out of that mess. The Commodore PC that Neil featured on RMC recently. It came from the same place. So 4 screws out. Does it just come apart? Yeah, it does. Oh my goodness. We have to at least take a look at the top of the board, don't we? Yeah, thanks very much for watching. See you next time. I don't want to admit defeat, but this one might be just a tad beyond saving. Where do you even begin? I mean, is it any wonder that the switch is seized solid? That will certainly have to be replaced. The RF modulator, well, that just gets binned anyway. I don't think we'll be needing that. 7805 is rather crispy looking, so that will have to go. But my main area of concern is the chipset. So I think the first thing that we need to do here, let's remove the ribbon cable and the Hue card slot. We'll remove the switch, the 7805 and the RF modulator. And that will hopefully give us a better look at what we're dealing with. I'm probably mad for even trying to attempt this, but let's just brush off the loose stuff on the bottom side here. Let's try and get some clean solder into these. Although these points don't actually look that bad, to be honest. And then let's see if the desoldering gun can free it up. Well, the ribbon cable, that came off easily enough. And you know what? That desoldering station, it would usually scratch up the solder mask a bit. But it hasn't done that here whatsoever. And it's given me a little bit of confidence that just maybe the solder mask on this will be resilient enough to survive this mess. But next thing I want to take off is the RF modulator. Those 3 points there, and then those 3. So I can't get these bits with the desoldering station. Let's just see if I can get it with some wick. Almost. Okay, it's loose. There's it off. And yeah, it's just a mess. Let's see about taking off this heatsink here from the 7805. We'll remove the regulator as well and try and remove that switch. Oh, hold on a minute. Never seen that before. That screw going through the regulator, that's actually a big blob of solder on it on that side. I thought that would just be a nut. That's weird. Is that weird? Probably common in PC Engine, but I've never seen it before. What is that? Is that a component? Is that a component, or is that a lump of rust? No, I think it's just a bit of rust. You know it's bad when you can't tell the difference between a bit of rust and a surface mount component. How am I going to get that out? Well, sounds like a good excuse to pull out my new PCB holder, because hopefully with this thing I can heat up that solder with one hand and try to unscrew the screw with the other. Oh, what a pain. Whoever thought this one up in NEC needs to take a good long hard look at themselves. Why wouldn't you just put a nut on the bottom of it? I don't know how I'm going to get this out actually, because all the heat I'm putting into it is being taken away by the screw, by the big heatsink, by the massive ground plane. This is going to take some effort to get out. So I cannot for the life of me get that screw out. The solder has flown down through the threads of it into the board. It will not budge. And given the size of that heatsink, I can't get enough heat into it to get that loosened. I might have to drill that out. But while I'm thinking about what I'm going to do with that, I'm just going ahead here and removing more or less all the rest of the through-hole stuff. Starting with that joypad port. But we'll remove that. Remove the DC barrel. We may as well remove all the caps because they'll all need replaced anyway. And that crystal, these ferrite beads here, I suppose I may as well just remove those. In fact, yeah, let's just remove everything through hole on this board. What a mess, and a pile of rusty components. But that is pretty much everything through hole removed apart from this edge connector here. And I was hoping that we could maybe get away without removing this, although that does look kind of bad. But the next thing that I want to try and do is give this a bath. Now ideally you would use an ultrasonic cleaner for this, but I don't have one, so we can't do that. Instead, I just have this little tub here with some white vinegar in the bottom of it. And we'll just drop this in. So just going to let that soak in there for probably about half an hour, just to try and loosen up all that dirt. I stuck all the other bits that we want to keep in here as well, just to give them a soak. The board itself has been in for about 10 minutes or so, and I'm just now going over it with the toothbrush just to try and loosen everything up. And hopefully you can see that it is starting to tidy up. Looks a million times better already. But as I say, it only has been about 10 minutes, and I want to leave it in there for at least another 20. Well, it's been in here just a shade over half an hour. Definitely starting to come up. Let's just give it another quick going over it with the toothbrush. Not forgetting, of course, the underside. I'll just pat it down a bit. Then we're going to dump out all that old vinegar, refill that tub with IPA, and give it a bath in that. I give it a very quick going over with a few cotton buds as well. And you know what? I don't actually see too much in the way of damage here. Yes, there still is a long way to go, but in terms of a quick visual inspection, all of those traces look fine. Maybe a couple there that will need some investigation. But next thing to do, let's get this into a bath of IPA. So that'll go in there, along with all these bits and pieces again. That switch is still absolutely seized solid though. We'll probably have to try and open it up and see if there's anything we can do. And I'm just going to leave that in there for maybe an hour this time. Going to give it plenty of time to soak the board, just to try and loosen up the remainder of any of that corrosion. Okay, it's an hour later. Let's fish this out of here. And you would almost swear that is a different board. Get all these other components out as well. The one thing that we did forget about though is this, the hue card slot. That is going to need a clean, as is the ribbon cable for it. So we'll just drop this into the IPA. This isn't too bad. I don't think it will need a bath in vinegar. But we'll leave that in there just while we go over this board with some cotton buds, just to dry it off and hopefully get rid of any remaining bits of corrosion. Out of interest, our switch. Nope. Oh, no, that is still not moving. This switch is no longer made. You can't get one of these other than in another PC Engine. So we're going to have to take it apart and see if there's anything we can do with it. But speaking quickly to a guy earlier on RMC's Discord called Argan, well, he seems to be a bit of a PC Engine expert. He certainly has been a mind full of knowledge in my conversation with him earlier today. And he reliably informs me that this should be savable. The inside of this should just be all copper and brass. It's just the can of it, which is steel and has rusted. So we'll take it apart in a minute and see if there's anything we can do with it. But before that IPA does totally dry, I just want to go over this board quickly. Because as you can see, there is still quite a bit of dirt to get off. I think it has cleaned up really well, but we are going to have to remove the rest of this. There is quite a bit of gunk up in there which I just can't get out. That's going to have to come off. And equally, looking through the legs of the chipset here and the RAM, I can see quite a bit of gunk on the board still there, so those need to come off as well. Going to have to be careful though, because so far I have caused 2 bits of damage. On the underside, we do unfortunately have 2 bits of delamination, and it wasn't really visible until the board has now been cleaned. At this point here, you can see it there, just where the RF can was removed. It did take an awful lot of heat to get those legs of the can itself out, and they were heavily rusted. So I'm not making excuses. I maybe should have taken more care, but we need to try and avoid any further damage. The other bit is down here. I'm not actually sure how this happened, because okay, I removed components from around here, but just that corner there, that has came away from the board. So I'll need to glue that back down, and just be extra careful then when removing the expansion port and when taking these off. I've taken this off, and you can see the sort of mess it was in underneath. Cleaned the board though. Next thing to tackle just is these chips. I've already reflowed around this one. These are all going to come off. But I thought I should at least show some of this, so let's pick this one here. Plenty of flux. Little bit of solder, not very much because we're just reflowing at the minute. I'm just going to dab in and out. We've got a little bit of a bridge here. Just a bit too much solder. But that doesn't look too bad now. I had the same issue actually when going around this chip. It does seem to soak away a lot of heat. And that is why we're getting those bridges there. Because the solder isn't flowing properly. This board is not easy to work on. I have made an absolute mess of this side of the chip. It's not too bad looking now, I suppose. To be honest with you, it would make me very worried about trying to remove these, because knowing me, I'll make a mess of it. I've been thinking about this, and while it goes against my better judgment, I think I'm not going to remove those. I think I'm going to leave them. And I want to reassemble the board and test it. I just wasn't happy with the way the solder was flowing around that. The board was taking so much heat away from the iron. I'd be worried that me trying to remove these, I'd be worried that I may rip up some traces, or I may damage pads, you know, lift pads, damage the traces connected to them. So I'm going to chicken out. We have reflowed everything, so hopefully that would solve any potential connectivity issues. And to be honest with you, after doing that, the board actually doesn't look too bad. Reflowing itself has definitely got rid of any of the visible corrosion. So yeah, I'm going to chicken out from removing them. Just while we're at it, you'll notice in this location, for example, there's a little bit of copper exposed. That's just because some of those traces looked a bit dodgy. Some of them have little black spots on them. For example, there's one. And so I've just been scratching away at the solder mask just to try and remove those wee bits of corrosion, and just to make sure that the copper underneath is good. That bit there, for example, that looks fine underneath. But we will of course test it all with the multimeter. In fact, what's easier to do is just to use the fiberglass pen. But yeah, all that looks fine. I don't want to remove too much of this if we don't have to. But it was this area here that definitely looked the worst. That bit there, for example, it does look quite bad. Although I'm not sure if it is actually broken, so let's just test with the meter. Test from that via down to this pin. Nope, that is fine. No issues there. Just before we do try and put it back together then, this switch, because this is going to be pretty critical in the operation of the thing. Can we fix this? It is still seized solid, so let's see about getting it apart. There's 4 very rusty looking tabs there. If I can try and open them up, that should allow the switch to come apart. Well, I might be able to fix it. But this is the problem. See that ball? That was in there where I'm currently trying to stick this cotton bud that is soaked in IPA. And in behind that was this spring, but those were seized solid. That spring has to compress when you try to move the switch, so the ball can move down inside this to allow it to slide. But everything was seized solid. It might be a bit better now though. It's about as clean as I can get it. And you know what might help it? A little bit of lithium grease. Yeah, that now moves freely. And I'm going to put some grease onto the side of the actual switch as well. Yeah, I think this is going to work. If I can just get these wee tabs closed over again, does the switch work? So that should be the switch off. So there shouldn't be any connectivity through there. Nope. Switch on. I think it's good. So switch reassembled and back on. Does it work? Yes. Fantastic. So all that's left to do then really is reassemble the rest of this board. Time for a soldering montage. Well, it's all back together and ready to test. Just fitted a 7805 in here with no heatsink. It'll be okay for a couple of minutes. And ultimately, if by any miracle this board works, that'll come out again anyway. And I want to fit one of those Traco voltage regulators. They don't need the heatsink anyway. This ribbon cable, my goodness, what an absolute faff. I cut it back. Tried to strip the PVC coating here and it broke some of the wires. So cut it back again, tried to strip it again and it broke again. Third time lucky though, being very careful, cutting it back and very, very carefully stripping it. I managed to get it done and get it back in here. But speaking to Argan again, well, he recommended actually doing away with this. You can buy a modern replacement kit for this cable. That comes as two PCBs that you would mount onto these boards and then a modern ribbon cable to replace this. But it's back in there for now and that will at least allow us to test it. So I'm just going to try and power the board up using our bench power supply. I've got it set to 9 volts. Let's set it to half an amp. We can hook up the positive supply just to the leg of this diode here. That's on the input anyway. Now we can just hook up the ground to something. I assume the can of that switch is grounded. Yeah. Let's just hook that up like that. And let's use our little scope to see if there's any signs of life. Let's go. Okay. It's only drawn 0.16 of an amp at 9 volts. What voltage do we have out around the board? I suppose the easiest place to pick it up would be at the leg of one of these capacitors. And 4.99, I'd say that's close enough. Do we have a clock signal? 21.47 megahertz. That'll actually be another test for this thing. I haven't fed a clock into this as high as this yet. And I think we should be able to pick up the clock from one of these pads here. Well, there's something there. Let's press auto. 21.4 megahertz. It is picking up the clock, but that doesn't really look like a clock signal. Let me change the scaling on this to 10 times. Doesn't look right in the waveform there, but the frequency's right, 21.4 megahertz. So we've definitely got a clock. Is it trying to produce any sort of video signal? Presumably one of these 3 pads here that was feeding the RF modulator, presumably one of those is a composite video signal. There's something going on there. Hey, that looks like a composite video signal, although the frequency is all over the place. Let me change this back to 1x. That is a composite video signal. I'm not sure why it's jumping all over the place like that, as is the frequency. But it is spending part of its time at 15.6 kilohertz, which is what I would expect to see. Should we try and hook up a cable to this and see if there's anything on the screen? So the easiest way I think that we can do this, we can pick up composite video and stereo audio off the bottom of the expansion bus connector. If I just pull up the pin out of this, although it's in a different orientation here, but regardless of that, these two on the end here, those are the left and right audio. And that second one in there, on row 22, pin 22A, that one, that is composite video. So I just cut up an old AV cable with video picked up there, then left and right audio. Grounds are made off onto that large ground plane there. Speaking of which, from this point, there is this grey wire. That is a factory mod, and that is intended to link the ground planes around the board, supposedly to improve compatibility with expansions, and in particular the CD drive. But we may be actually missing a couple of these, because if you look down here, there is another blob of solder there. There's one there, and there's one there. So maybe there should be additional cables from there to there to there. And indeed, back to here, there was another blob of solder there. So that is something that we maybe should do, but I am dying to know what this thing is doing, if anything, on the screen. So that can wait till later. These yellow ones, I'm not actually sure what these are doing. I'm not sure if this is a factory mod or not. This one here, it's connected at that point on the edge connector, and that pin is identified as IRQ2, which itself is the external IRQ. So again, maybe this is something to do with expansions, maybe something to do with the CD drive. Those aren't the original cables, I just replaced them. The old ones were off anyway. They were disconnected at this point, obviously, when the edge connector was off, and all the passives on the bottom here, all of that has been reflowed as well. So while doing it, I just fitted new wires just to tidy it up a bit. So we've got power hooked up again. I only do have the one game, just a golf game here. It's the only Hue card I have. But let's stick this in. This machine itself doesn't have a ROM, so without a Hue card, it really isn't going to do very much. But let's see if it is in fact doing anything at all. What do you think? Are we even going to get an image? So, yes, okay. Video signal, which looks a bit wonky, but is it working? It's playing sounds. It's making noises, and in between the interference, there is a game running. It looks like a golf game. And yeah, I think this is working. I do not believe it. I need a second. What? Okay, I've calmed down a bit. Looking through the interference, everything looks right. Okay, it's not in colour, it's in black and white. And in fact, just thinking about that, could that be something to do with my capture card settings? Because this is an NTSC machine, and I'm pretty sure my capture card is set to PAL at the minute. Just give me a second. Well, nope. I changed the settings to NTSC, and if anything, it actually looks worse. What is going on? Because other than the interference, everything looks good. I can't plug in a joystick to test because I don't have one. And to be honest anyway, I think that port will just need to be replaced. It was incredibly rusted. Even inside, it is heavily rusted. So I've been trying to figure out what could possibly be causing that interference in the composite video signal. That chip there, the 6260, that is the video chip, for want of a better term. It produces the RGB and sync output. And then the circuitry on the bottom of the board that produces the composite video signal. It's mostly all passives apart from those 3 transistors there. So I wonder, do we maybe have a problem in one of those? So that might need some further investigation. But, where do you see this? See those yellow wires? What happens when I touch that? Why? I double checked all this down here. There's nothing shorting out or anything. Everything is hooked up correctly. And these 2 wires are hooked up exactly as they were originally. So what is going on? I speculated earlier that these wires might be involved with an expansion, possibly the CD drive. But may these have something to do with the video signal? Well, they obviously do, because if I touch them, it screws up the video signal. Something shocking. The assumption would be that the modifications to the board, because not just those wires, there are a couple of traces cut. There's 3 that I can see. There's a cut there, in there, and just there. My assumption would be that those cuts were made at the time that these wires were installed. But maybe these were installed to coincide with some external video device. Might this be something to do with the PAL mod, maybe? I'm tempted to remove those wires and to reinstate all those cuts, all those traces that are cut. There only is the 3 points, and it wouldn't be hard to do. I want to try that. In fact, I wonder what it does on the screen with those disconnected. So yeah, I'm convinced that those wires must be involved in some sort of video mod, because with those disconnected, it does nothing on the screen, but it still makes noises. So the game is still running, it's just not displaying a picture. So there's a cut made just at this point here. It's been cut just there. If I can just expose some of the copper on the traces. Put a wee bit of flux down. A little bit of solder. And can I bridge it with a bit of wrapping wire? Doesn't need to be pretty. This is only just to test with. And yeah, okay. That's that cut fixed. So let me fix the other 2 that I know of anyway, and then we'll test it again. Okay, 1, 2, 3 cut traces now reinstated. Does that fix the mess on the screen? Power on. Video signal looks good. It's in color. It's working. Unbelievable! It's working! Cannot get over this. Oh my god, this is so amazing. I never thought this thing would work, and it certainly appears to be working fine. So what were those 2 yellow wires doing? Obviously it must have been part of some video expansion mod, and those were just screwing everything up on us because we don't have said expansion. I can't get over the fact that this works, and other than giving it a clean, a recap, fixing the switch and removing one prior modification, didn't actually do a lot to it. So they're definitely hardy wee boards, I'll give it that. So I think we'll just close the video out at that. The PC Engine works, or at least it appears to anyway. What it's putting on the screen, that all looks fine, and it certainly seems to be making all the right noises. We haven't been able to test the joypad port yet, because well, I don't have a joypad. I'll have to order one, and I'll probably have to get a replacement socket anyway. But who would have thought at the start of this video that that PC Engine, given the state that it was in, who would have thought that all it actually needed was a clean and a recap? Yeah, okay, we had to remove that mod, whatever that mod was doing, but clean and a recap, and it started working. So it just goes to show that despite how it looked, well, these old machines, no matter what condition they're in, they can be saved. Now yes, hands up I did cause a little bit of damage in the process. There is that little bit of delamination on the bottom of the board. And thinking about it, I reckon that was probably caused by my soaking the board in the white vinegar and the IPA, and maybe not letting it dry properly before hitting it with the soldering iron. Or in fact, even putting aside the soaking that I gave it, this thing, judging by the state of the case and judging by the amount of rust on it, it probably got soaked in its previous life. So there is a chance that the board, that the PCB, had moisture trapped within it. And when I've introduced heat from the iron at 300 plus degrees Celsius, that has instantly boiled off any moisture in the board and caused it to delaminate. So maybe what I should have done first was try to dry out the board. Although, how would I even go about doing that? I don't really have anything that I could use to do that, other than maybe sticking that into a hot press for, I don't know, a week or so. But look, food for thought for the future. Lesson learned, definitely be more careful on my part. But putting that aside, we do have a working PC Engine. So, as I say, we'll close the video off at that. Next time when we come back, I'll hopefully have a joypad so we can test that side of it. And we need to have a think about what we're going to do with this. Will I just give it a wash? Or should I just pick off all the loose bits of dirt and clear coat over it to protect its patina? Probably not. But that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed what you've seen, I would appreciate a thumbs up. Why not hit subscribe if you haven't done so already? Still plenty more yet to come here on CRG, and I'll see you next time.